Brace yourself.
It's been a long time coming for Gears for Breakfast's A Hat in Time. This passion project has grown from a Kickstarter success to one of the poster children of the 3D platformer renaissance that we've seen over the past few years. While its spotlight was definitely stolen a bit by games like Yooka-Laylee and Super Mario Odyssey, A Hat in Time still made waves, which by all accounts is encouraging for a game that had such an extensive development, but also a very humble presence. And even with the game coming out nearly 1 year ago, there's still been a substantial amount of fan push behind it, especially with the release of the Seal the Deal DLC pack. Despite my intrigue toward this game and its reception, my time with A Hat in Time has been delayed at best. So many channels have done the deed already and laid out their opinions on A Hat in Time, but as I did with Yooka-Laylee, I want to give this one its share of critique as well, even if I missed the train a while back. So, pardon the lateness on this one. This is an overdue critique of A Hat in Time. You may recall when I name-dropped A Hat in Time in my Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts video, saying that its development and release was likely a symptom of Rare's ignorance and general disrespect for the 3D platformer genre that they helped popularize. I stand by that claim, but A Hat in Time is a notable figure in the resurgence of 3D platformers in 2017 and beyond. I do remember the initial pitch of A Hat in Time being one of the first, if not the first, 3D platformer revival of the new millennium. Citing influences like Banjo-Kazooie, it was destined to grab the attention of starved gamers who lamented the disappearance of these types of games and who were put off by how the grandfathers of the genre were treating it. I kept a sharp eye on this game as far back as its Kickstarter, as, at the time, it was a daring move to use online crowdfunding, which was still a young outlet for raising development funds, to pitch a revisiting to what was still a pretty niche genre. As I said, it was destined to grab the attention of the genre's fans, but whether or not that would lead to something genuinely unique and high quality was yet to be seen. It was a risky maneuver through and through. But Gears for Breakfast stood their ground and managed to deliver a 3D platformer that never stretched itself too thin. Instead of pushing the game with additional playstyles and extraneous modes, the devs spent more time on refining the core platforming mechanics instead. And that honed mentality is what makes A Hat in Time a brief but very polished 3D platformer. The moving parts of this game all feel interlocked, and very little of the game's meat feels like it could be cut away without damaging the ethos of its design. It's just that well made. Like the game's influences before it, A Hat in Time doesn't hesitate in delivering a bottomless reserve of charm. It's an adventure featuring the aptly titled Hat Kid, who, while traveling through space, loses her power sources, magic hourglasses called timepieces. To get them back, she must explore the various levels, encounter goofy side characters, and butt heads with the mischievous Mustache Girl, who wants to use the timepieces herself to combat anyone who she finds unjust. It's a race to snatch up the timepieces, all while exploring the stages for items and secrets. A Hat in Time makes no effort to hide its style, and it results in a game that's very inviting and player-friendly when it comes to its aesthetic. Hat Kid is an expressive main character, despite her dialogue being limited to tiny sound bites. The ability to change hat styles with flair items mirrors the childhood tradition of playing dress-up, giving the game a sort of playful nostalgia to its graphic design. Characters' dialogue and voice acting are exaggerated and cartoony. The game bursts with color and variety in its stage direction, and its soundtrack is memorable and atmospheric in all the right ways. These presentation elements all made A Hat in Time's influences shine, and it's no different here. There are so many moments throughout that stuck with me before the credits rolled. When it comes to creating a purely charming experience, A Hat in Time is a resounding success. But as a 3D platformer, A Hat in Time's motion mechanics are a cornerstone in the gameplay. The greatest examples of the genre all manage to make their movement feel satisfying, that whole joy of motion thing I brought up before. It's the genre's core essence, a component in any great platformer's DNA. The movement in A Hat in Time grabbed me as I progressed in my playthrough, but it didn't do it at the start. Hat Kid's navigational moveset stuck to some pretty standard elements: double jumps, sliding, wall jumps, ledge grabbing, the works. It was around the time I got to the third stage, the Subcon Forest, that I began to see bits of potential begin to be realized. The trees in the forest are littered with leaf plumes that Hat Kid can use as platforms, in addition to lanterns that can be used as grappling points for the hookshot upgrade. It's not entirely difficult to traverse these platforms, simply being careful with your jumps can get the job done. But then I noticed some particularly harrowing jumps, ones that required a bit more precision and some tighter reflexes to accomplish. These jumps needed some expert combinations of double jumps, sliding, and swinging to complete. And that's where it all came together. A Hat in Time proved to me right there just how calculated its design is. And I think that's very important to mention. It's one thing to provide level structure that challenges with platforming in mind, but it's another thing entirely to make these levels feel cohesive and united. It's one thing to populate a world with objects and collectibles to create density, but it's another thing entirely to make these items' locations meaningful and rich with purpose. This was something I never really saw in Yooka-Laylee. Hell, even Super Mario Odyssey had its moments of seemingly arbitrary design, despite how much I love that game. But A Hat in Time has this attentiveness, this incredible deliberation in its design, where nearly every bit is put into place for a reason. The way the treetops were organized in the Subcon Forest prioritized mastery of your platforming moves, the kind of layouts that accommodate learning about your jump arc, the level of maneuverability you have when in mid-air, the range of the context-sensitive commands that allow you to grapple with the hookshot. These moments are rich with synergy. It's clear that Gears for Breakfast made their game with charm and nostalgia in mind, but unlike their peers and even their idols' works, there's level design that is built around the platforming mechanics and how they work, instead of the opposite. This is made crystal clear in many of the Time Rift stages, which catapult Hat Kid into abstract obstacle courses taken straight from Super Mario Sunshine or Super Mario Galaxy. It's here where the movement shines the brightest, where the aesthetic context is stripped away, and the acrobatics are given the freedom necessary to really flow together seamlessly. I cannot stress it enough, and it makes getting around almost every area a totally satisfying act. It feels so natural to move in A Hat in Time. With all of the praise I've made for the game's locomotion, it's crucial to understand A Hat in Time's ethos, because unlike many other platformers that launched in its release year, it's not a collect-a-thon, in the traditional sense anyway. Yes, you do collect items which feed into various rewards, but these are supplemental to the platforming itself. While levels might need pods to unlock or require a specific hat skill to complete, these moments are pretty minimal, and the game does its hardest to make progression a relatively simple endeavor, catapulted by the player's growing mastery of the movement. There aren't hundreds of timepieces to find. My count after beating the final boss was around 30, which might sound a bit scarce, but I reiterate, this isn't a collect-a-thon like Banjo-Kazooie was. This is a game built and directed via a focused mentality that gave Gears for Breakfast all the tools they needed to make collecting items into an embedded element instead of something that dominated the conversation for level design. Everything feels interwoven within each other, and even when the game demands you seek out a specific number of items, like in the Death Wish missions in the Seal the Deal DLC, platforming comes first every time. Even in the moments where exploring a world is a bit more scripted and linear, like in the Murder on the Owl Express, I was still pretty surprised at how much platforming was involved. At first, the Murder on the Owl Express felt in tune with another of the game's influences, Psychonauts, where it's more about talking with other characters and solving simple puzzles than platforming. But on further examination, I noticed that the stealth gameplay fit together well with Hat Kid's navigational moveset. Dodging the guards' lines of sight was a cool way of encouraging more freeform and experimental platforming, and I can't remember the last time I enjoyed a stealth section in any game this much, let alone in a platformer. I think this shows that Gears for Breakfast are willing to diverge upon the expectations of making a platformer, as they've crafted so many off-the-wall ideas that ultimately supplement Hat Kid's platforming toolbox. It works so well. A Hat in Time also manages to do so much with such a short runtime. Even with an extra act in the Seal the Deal DLC, its level count is much lower than its peers and idols, but at the same time, it's very hard to ignore the quality of each world's design. It's clear as day that the developers put their all into every tiny bit of the stages. Environmental items form logical paths and sections. Platforms are organized in ways that feel cohesive for jumping and movement. Everything just feels so natural. I can't help but praise that attitude or its results. Do I want more stages? Absolutely. But even hoping for more, I don't think A Hat in Time is somehow a lesser product without them. It all comes down to how polished each stage is, and Gears for Breakfast's quality over quantity direction clearly paid off big time. In the growing circuit of 3D platformer revivals, A Hat in Time stands with unwavering confidence. The long road to release showed that Gears for Breakfast understand the makings of quality movement and level design that openly supports it, along with what hindrances need to be removed. It brings out the childlike wonder of discovery and desire to explore. Despite wearing its influences on its sleeve, A Hat in Time nimbly dodges those influences' missteps, making an experience that actually surpasses them in many ways. It's a brief venture, but it's one that gets the job done in as much time as it needs, never stretching itself too thin or devaluing its goal in the name of pointless filler. I want to see Gears for Breakfast grow and deliver another winning hit soon, but for now, I see myself replaying A Hat in Time from beginning to end whenever I need a platformer fix. It's too soon to tell for sure, but I see great things in the developer's future, especially if their opening act can conquer its scene so confidently. For all its humble origins, A Hat in Time stands tall as a true platformer triumph.